Quite Right, a podcast where we explain random things. Each of us has chosen and done a little research on a topic, and neither of us know what topic the other chose. I'm Brooke.
My name is Casey. DJ Casey, we're coming at you on your morning commute. Welcome, campers. It's going to be a long, cold day and a long, cold winter, and we're here to warm it for you.
I think you're just in a bad mood because it's cold outside.
It is so cold, it sucks.
Speaking of living in a cold place, because we live in a place, but not because it's cold, but because Casey's almost done with grad school, we're going to cut back to one podcast a month for the next couple of months. And then eventually we'll get back on a every other week schedule.
Yeah, which is what we've been doing anyway, but this is a hobby that we're doing for fun. And it turns out it's actually stressful to try to do this with all the stuff we've been going on. And so we still want to do it because it is fun, but we're going to try to hold ourselves to a more reasonable schedule.
Right.
So let's do this. What do we got this time?
Okay. So tell me everything that you know about my topic, which is the Oscars.
The Oscars are an award show, which is held by Hollywood annually. And they give... Wait, hang on. So the Oscars is... Well, it's the Academy Awards, the Academy of Film People, etc.
You're not wrong.
It is a bunch of... Okay, so here's what I know. I have no clue who the Academy is. It's a bunch of people who are involved in Hollywood shit, and they do awards, and it's like the most prestigious type movie awards. Only some critics don't really care about them and they do other awards for other things, and then the Meryl Streep says things that's the Oscars.
Yes.
The end. I don't know.
Nope, that covers it. I'm done now.
Okay.
That's my topic.
Cool. I'm glad we could illuminate you there and in record time.
No. So first off, it's called the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences.
Sciences.
Or AMPAS.
Where the hell does science come from?
Well, the sound engineering and technical effects and things like that.
Okay.
Sciences is a part of it. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences was founded in 1927 by this guy, Louis B. Mayer, who is actually also co-founder of MGM. The very incredibly popular. Yes, the Lion Roaring Studios.
Sure.
Those guys. He's actually a Russian executive and film producer. Well, was. I don't think he's alive anymore. I'm not actually sure.
Or maybe he ceased to be Russian.
Maybe he just gave up on being Russian. But he came up with the idea for the Academy. He thought there should be one... The way that his description kind of reads is a little bit like a union, a little bit like trying to establish some norms throughout the industry and some other things. So he invited 36 guys throughout in different parts of the industry, like some writers and actors and directors, lawyers, and I think a couple of technical guys as well. And he was like, hey, I want to do this thing. We should do it. So they did that in January of 1927. And then the first award ceremony was in May of 1929. So that's 2 years after they originally founded it. And they've been going pretty much every year since then. Since the first Academy Awards in 1929, over 3,000 awards have been handed out. The exact count right now is 3,048, not including the Oscars that will be happening later this month. So I pulled some interesting data from the very first awards presentation. It was held at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel in Los Angeles, which is actually still in operation and the oldest continually operating hotel in Los Angeles. It was hosted by the Academy president, Douglas Fairbanks, and winners were announced 3 months before the event. So, everybody already knew when they came who was getting the statues.
Wow, Twitter must have sucked that night.
Yeah, it was pretty boring. Definitely not interesting at all. They only did that the very first time, the super in advance, but it wasn't until 1941 that nobody knew who it was before they opened the sealed envelopes.
When did they become big? When did they become an event?
Well, so they started televising it in 1953, and it's pretty much only gone up in popularity since then. 270 people attended the first one, and they had to pay $5 a ticket, which is about $70 in 2016 dollars. The entire ceremony was only 15 minutes long, and they handed out 15 statuettes in that time.
That's a terrible per hour rate.
No, that's amazing.
I would not pay $70 for 15
out.
minutes worth of entertainment.
Maybe
That's
it
an
wasn't
Opeth
worth
song.
it. Maybe it wasn't worth it. There were 12 categories, and then they had 2 honorary awards, and one of those categories, there were 2 people who got statues. So that's why there were 15. One was Best Outstanding Picture, that they've only been calling the category Best Picture since 1962.
Mm-hmm.
And then a couple of more interesting categories are Unique and Artistic Picture, Best Director for a Comedy Picture, Best Engineering Effects, and Best Title Writing. All 4 of those awards only existed for the 1929 ceremony.
It's best title writing. I guess that'd be like for
Like
a
the title
silent
cards,
film.
right? Yeah. And a number of these awards, like for Best Actor, for example, the guy who won, which I can't believe I didn't write down his name, but the guy who won for Best Actor won for 2 films. They recognized the actors and actresses for all of their work in 1928.
Wow. Yeah, I was surprised that they discontinued the best use of racism category, but I guess that's frowned upon now more than it was back then.
It is. So just for comparison, here's some information about the last year Academy Awards. It was the 88th. They have moved slowly over time from the original ones in May to now the end of February. It was held in a theater that's pretty much just across the street from the original theater where it was held. It's been in a few different places, but the Dolby Theater in Hollywood is now where it's usually held, and it's like literally across the street. Chris Rock hosted it. Usually it's like an actor these days. Winners are obviously now announced at the ceremony, which I mentioned earlier. They broadcast it, and it was viewed by 34 million people, which is actually pretty low. The lowest it had been in a few previous years. I couldn't find any numbers on exactly how many people attended or what they had to pay, if anything, but it was 3 hours and 37 minutes long. There were 24 categories instead of just 12, 2 honorary awards, and a humanitarian award.
So categories per minute has been like stretched out enormously.
Indeed. Indeed it has.
Much less efficient nowadays.
So the statuettes have been basically the same design since 1929, which I thought was interesting. The base itself wasn't standardized until 1945, but the statue has been pretty much the same since 1929. It was designed by this guy, Cedric Gibbons, who worked for, oh my gosh, I can't remember what studio, and I didn't write it down. And it was sculpted by George Stanley, who was an LA artist. It's 13.5 inches tall, it's 8.5 pounds, and it's not actually called Oscar, like that's not its technical name. The actual name is the Academy Award of Merit.
Which leads to the natural follow-up question.
Why is it called Oscar?
Oh yeah, that.
I don't know what follow-up question you were going for.
Yeah, no, why Oscar?
There are a few different, like, conflicting stories about where it originally came from. Betty Davis wrote in one of her books, in her autobiography, that she named the statue after her husband. An executive secretary for the Academy, like, exclaimed that the statues reminded her of her uncle Oscar. The second thing definitely happened, but, like, it's unknown whether she had, like, heard the Betty Davis thing first or if she was the first one to say it. But either way, in 1932, when Walt Disney accepted his award, he called it an Oscar, thanked the Academy for his Oscar. By 1934, it was well known enough that a columnist called it an Oscar when he was talking about Katharine Hepburn's first Oscar win. And in 1939, the nickname became the official nickname. But an interesting thing is that it's actually, like, the Oscar statuette is supposed to be a knight, you know, like knight with a K. And he's, like, holding a little sword thing. It is actually a crusader's sword. And the base is supposed to be a reel of film with 5 spokes. And each of the spokes represents one of the 5 original branches of the Academy, which is actors, directors, producers, technicians, and writers.
I did not pick up on any of that. Or rather, I have not picked up on any of that in.
Hopefully you picked up on
TV.
it right now when I told you.
Yeah, no, I got that.
Right. So I just have a handful of kind of interesting fun facts about the Oscars that I wanted to grab and share with you.
Lightning round, go.
One of the things that I thought was most interesting is that since 1950, Oscar winners are legally required to sign an agreement that says that they won't sell it. If they want to sell it, then they have to offer it to the Academy in exchange for $1. And that legally binding contract also applies to heirs.
That seems dumb. I'm against that. I think you should be able to hawk your Oscar on eBay or Craigslist or wherever.
A couple of people have. There was like one thing, like a court decided was illegal for him to sell it. I didn't write that one down, but a couple of successful ones. A guy who won it in 1946 sold his Oscar in the 90s to pay for medical treatment for his wife. And when people gave him crap for it, he was like, the movie's still around, you guys. My wife is not going to be around forever, and I would like to spend all the money that I can on her, like getting her well. And then Orson Welles' 1941 Oscar for Citizen Kane was sold online for over $850,000. A couple other interesting things during World War II, you know, there were metal shortages because all the metal had to be going to like making war stuff. So they actually made those statues in the 3 years that the U.S. was involved in the war out of painted plaster. For a film to be considered feature length, according to the rules of the Academy, it has to be at least 40 minutes long. There have been 2 Academy Awards that were postponed. One was the 40th Academy Awards, was postponed 2 days because of Martin Luther King's assassination. In Memoriam, the very tragic piece where we get to look at sad pictures of all the people that we love who died, that wasn't introduced until 1993. Pretty relatively recent one. The longest ceremony ever was in 2002. It was 4 hours and 23 minutes long. And the Best Picture category has had 537 films nominated over the history of the awards. So there you go. That's all the information I got for you. Oscars.
Oscars.
Questions? Comments?
No. I mean, I don't. No, I got nothing.
That's all right. I thought like it would be kind of an interesting category given that, you know, you and I have gotten more into the Oscars in the last couple of years, always watching all of the Best Picture nominees before the Oscars happen.
This is accurate. That's a thing we do.
That is a thing that we do.
And cross promotion, we also do a movie blog, which you should read.
It's called Brooke and Casey at the Movies.
It's just a WordPress. We don't spring money on it, but it's good. Anyway, that's movies.
Yeah, movies.
And we are back coming at you for the 5 o'clock hour for the drive. 1 hour free of commercial-free music from Not Quite Right Radio.
That's actually 100% fiction.
Nope, we're going to come at you for about the next 10 minutes or so. And we're going to talk about another topic, Half-Life.
Half-Life. It's a video game.
It is a video game. What can you tell me about it?
It's from Valve. Valve is the company that makes it, which I know because they're the same company that does Portal. And I really like Portal. And I know that there's supposedly some Portal Half-Life crossover, but I don't really know a lot about that. But I do know that there is a Half-Life 2, and maybe there's going to be a Half-Life 3, and there's like always random clamoring for like, when's the next sequel? Because that's how people are. They always want more of the same thing. I'm pretty sure it's like a first-person shooter type setup, but I really don't know a lot about Half-Life beyond that.
Well, what you did know, I am impressed with. And I'm going to tell you why the people are clamoring and why they are justified to do so and why the revolution is going to come because of it.
Okay.
Or not, but should.
Cool.
So Half-Life is, as you said, a first-person shooter game that was originally released in 1998 to great acclaim by the developer Valve. It was their first game, and it was groundbreaking in a lot of ways because the story was structured. It was basically a glorified version of Doom. You play as a voiceless character named Gordon Freeman, who you only ever see the game through his perspective, through first person. So there were no cutscenes, there was no like dialogue trees or anything like that. Nothing to kind of take you out of this experience that you were in the whole time, which was pretty unique for the time.
Yeah.
And that was
a lot like Portal.
Yeah,
that's a lot of what I like about Portal.
Yeah, exactly, because similar design philosophies.
Right.
That a lot of that began with Half-Life, and it was one of the first games to really do that. Especially when this is when games were starting to, when 3D was just starting to come to its own, and they were moving in a more cinematic direction with like all sorts of swoopy camera, cutscene stuff. Half-Life kind of eschewed that and went with something which was at the time very unique. And again, you play as Gordon Freeman, an MIT graduate scientist working at the secretive, mysterious Black Mesa Research Facility. And at the beginning of the game, you are conducting an experiment wherein you push a doohickey into a laser field, and everything goes horrendously wrong, and everything blows up. And it turns out that you have somehow crossed dimensions or opened a portal to some alien world who is now invading the Black Mesa Research Facility. So you have to try to escape to the surface to call for help, but you're protected because you have a hazardous environmental suit, an HEV suit, because you're not a space marine. And so you, as you make your way to the surface, you encounter all sorts of various alien creatures and critters. And it's the gameplay was pretty unique because the environments had a kind of realism to them that a lot of games at the time did not have. They were not really exaggerated or out of this world. They were still very gamey, but it had a feel of an actual research facility. But as you get to the surface, twist! It turns out the military is already there to save you. Except they're not there to save you. They're there to clean up everything, which means killing all the scientists and wiping out the aliens. So all of a sudden, you find yourself on the run from all sorts of nasty, otherworldly creatures and the military, who at the time were possessed of some surprisingly good artificial intelligence for a video game, and actually still holds up well today. It was better AI than even its sequel. And as you go through the course of the game, you have to escape both of them, and you end up going on a massive murder spree because that's kind of how you do in those games. And eventually you make your way to a place where you can go into a portal into the alien world and kill their leader, and that's the end of the game. Throughout the game, though, you occasionally meet this enigmatic figure who's always behind like glass or walls, kind of walking away from you, who is known as the G-Man. And at the end of the game, he confronts you and offers you a choice, wherein you can either join him in some mysterious endeavor that's not told you anything about, or you can refuse. And if you refuse, you're killed, basically. And if you join him, you go into a portal, and that's the end of the game. Half-Life was particularly interesting and a lot of fun because it was not the first game to have a kind of a thriving mod scene, but it was one of the first ones that went really mainstream. With in particular, so I played a mod called Team Fortress Classic back in the day, which was an update of a Quake game that was Capture the Flag. But the big mod for Half-Life that sort of took over the world at the time was called Counter-Strike, which I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I've heard that term.
Counter-Strike I actually hated it. It was too hard for me. But it was sort of Call of Duty before Call of Duty. It was a team-based shooter one, and it was very harsh in its rules. Like, if you died in a round, you were dead until the end of that round. So it was very sort of realistic for the time. Yeah, and it's still actually played today. Like, I looked on Steam stats, and there are like 16,000 people still playing this game.
Dang.
And then many, many more thousands playing an updated version that came out a couple years ago. So that was where Half-Life left off. But then there was nothing. And there had been rumors for many years of a sequel, but nothing happened for so long that it started making lists of like Vaporware Title of the Year, which is, announced title that's never released. And Valve is sort of a notoriously secretive company, so nothing came out about it. And a lot of people thought, well, I guess the sequel is just never going to happen. I think in like 2005, there was the source code of the sequel was finally released in a hacked form. Somebody had gotten access to Valve servers and released this unfinished alpha version of the game. And so they ended up having to make significant changes as a result of that. But it did mean that they were making progress toward the sequel, Half-Life 2, which was released in 2004.
Wait, you said 2005 was the hack.
Oh, the hack was before. That was like 2003. I don't know.
Okay.
The hack was before the game. The point is Half-Life 2, released in 2004, is probably my favorite game ever. I love it. you you again reprise the role of Gordon Freeman, this time released from your captivity or whatever by this G-Man, and you're sent into the world again. Only this time, the world has been taken over by sort of an occupying alien like police force called the Combine. And as it turns out, the Combine was like the big bad behind everything in the first game, and the enemies you were fighting there were actually another race of aliens fleeing the Combine, and blah blah blah. It doesn't really matter unless you play it.
Hey, whoa. Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. So here, let me tell you why this is actually interesting, because Half-Life 2 does not have, like the original Half-Life, doesn't have a lot of like cutscenes or long bits of narration. Has more than the first one, but a lot of the details of the story are told through environmental storytelling, so little snippets on walls, little things that you just pick up here and there, but it's not actually kind of shoved in your face.
Right.
And it turns out the Gordon Freeman character has, for reasons that are never quite explained, attained an almost mythical status among the survivors of humanity who are being repressed under the yoke of the Combine and their human collaborators. And so it's actually kind of fun because later in the game, characters join up with you, and you are this sort of heroic figure, the free man. And it's great, and it's a lot of fun. Yeah, and it was developed with a new physics engine that they called, or new graphics engine that they called the Source engine, which was the same one that was the basis for Portal. So that's why they have a very similar graphical look. And Portal 2, the reason it ties into Half-Life is that, so Half-Life, you have the Black Mesa research facility, right?
Right.
Portal 2, I think in its story elements, you're working for, what is it called, Aperture Science?
Yeah, Aperture Science.
Yeah, and they're like introduced as like a competitor to the Black Mesa research facility.
Yeah, and like in one of the songs, I think it's the song that GLaDOS sings at the end of the first Portal game, she references Black Mesa.
Yeah, maybe Black Mesa. Mm-hmm. Haha, fat chance. Something like that.
Something like that.
And I think actually in one point in Half-Life 2, or one of the later follow-ups, it briefly mentions Aperture, but there's really no other crossover. It's just sort of a little Easter egg. I suppose.
I remembered the lyric. It's maybe Black Mesa. That was a joke.
Ha ha. Fat chance. Oh, that was great.
I love those dumb songs that GLaDOS sings.
So Half-Life 2 ends with you kind of destroying the Combines, like this enormous tower in the middle of the city that you play most of the game in, which is sort of an Eastern European themed city called City 17. By the way, I should mention Half-Life 2 also has a horror themed level that's a lot of fun, which is kind of completely out of left field and nothing like the rest of the game.
All right.
It's called We Don't Go to Ravenholm. It's a hoot. So Half-Life 2 ends with you possibly destroying or beating the Combine, and again, you're kind of taken out by the G-Man, and he tells you, well, this time I'm not giving you a choice. You're just with me. Haha, sucker. And then the game ends. And also, Half-Life 2 introduces a sidekick character who's with you periodically named Alex Vance, she's like the daughter of one of the characters supposedly from the first game, who's kind of fleshed out more.
I've heard that name.
Yeah, she's actually really great because she's one of the first of all, one of the best written sort of sidekick characters in video games in general. Mm-hmm. And she's like a cool female character who's not like hypersexualized or objectified in the ways that a lot of video game characters are. And got some good dialogue. And it starts to get weird actually with Half-Life 2 because there are a lot of more scenes with characters talking at Gordon Freeman, but your character never talks back. So I guess you're meant to like pretend that you're speaking back, but sometimes they remark on how you're the silent type.
Yeah.
So it gets kind of goofy with that narrative conceit that it sets up.
Like the amount of parallels between like Portal and Half-Life and Portal 2 and Half-Life 2, just as you're describing Half-Life 2, is kind of hilarious.
Yeah, I think Portal was what? It was like a student project that someone did with the Source engine that got picked up by Valve.
I don't actually know a lot about the origins of Portal. Maybe we'll do an episode about it sometime.
Yeah, I think it was something like that.
But it's like in the sequel, you pick up a buddy, and a lot more characters are talking at you. Of course, it's through the form of like recordings from the early years of Aperture Science, but like it's just interesting.
Yeah, Portal 2 is great too. I love it.
I love Portal 2.
I
love Portal and Portal 2.
So
wonderful video games.
Yeah, so Half-Life 2 also has a mod scene that's pretty thriving, and they get a lot of traction off of that. There were 2 follow-ups to the game that were called Half-Life 2 Episode 1 and Half-Life 2 Episode 2. So they were meant to be sort of episodic follow-ups to the story that just continued right where the end of the game left off. And you're escaping City 17 because it's about to blow up because some reactor.
Right.
And then you find out, I think in Episode 2, that there's a doohickey that Aperture Science has been working on, and you have to find the doohickey to stop the Combine from escaping or getting back or something like that.
Yeah.
And Half-Life 2 Episode 2 ends, I think it's just called Half-Life Episode 2, actually. Anyway, it ends with a major character, a major story character being killed right in front of you. And you and Alex Vance, I think for the sequels, for the episodes, Alex is tagging along with you the whole time. Mm-hmm. And she's like your kind of buddy. And the sequel ends, the episodes end with a character being killed. And there's this major cliffhanger. And that's it. And then it's fade to black. And Alex is like, no. And then it's over.
And there's been nothing since.
And that was, I think, in 2007.
Right.
And nothing since. Radio silence. And there have been stories, little snippets that have come out of Valve. Because in the interim, they have released Portal and Left 4 Dead and Dota and the Steam platform. And they are making money hand over fist. And they are not releasing any information about the game. And it's pretty much presumed by everybody that it is just dead. That not only is it not happening, but it's not going to happen.
That's so sad.
It's incredibly sad and frustrating.
I'm so sorry.
Because there's this presumption that, I guess, that if they can't make this amazing, groundbreaking game, why even try? Why try to top themselves again?
Perfectionists.
Especially when they're already making all the money in the world, because
right.
half of games are sold through their platform. So anyway, that's the state of Half-Life, and that's why fans who sort of look back on the game with fondness are also enraged at the nothing that has come out since. And unlike between Half-Life and Half-Life 2, there's not even a hint that there's going to be a Half-Life 3 at this point.
Jeez.
It's just, it's dead. It's not going to happen.
Maybe it'll just be like the most recent Fallout where all of a sudden they'll just drop a countdown on their website out of nowhere.
They might. I mean, Fallout changed developers too. So when Fallout 3 came out, it was a different developer than the original two.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because that developer had, I think, gone bankrupt.
Huh, I didn't know that.
Or gotten defunct.
Right.
But that's where we are with Half-Life, the series. And Gordon Freeman is just stuck somewhere in a barn. And Eli Vance is dead. And, spoiler alert, by the way, Eli Vance dies. And Eli Vance is dead. And we don't know what's supposed to happen. And the Combine is still at large. And it could come back any day now, and we will never know. And it's one of the best game series that I've ever played, and I love it a lot. And I'm really annoyed that there's probably not going to be a conclusion to it. The end. There's a conclusion to this podcast, Valve.
Welcome to our podcast where we talk about things that mean a lot to Casey.
Where Casey rants about video games. Now let me talk to you about feminism and the problem with that.
Don't even.
Nope, we're not one of those podcasts. Fuck those guys.
Anyway, thanks for listening to our podcast. And don't forget to check out our blog that we mentioned if you would like. It's pretty awesome. Brooke and Casey at the Movies. And don't forget to check out my other podcast, A Pretty Past, which is also awesome.
As always, follow us on Twitter, leave us a review, tell your friends.
We're at NQR_podcast on Twitter.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Obligatory test of the audio. We're playing audio in the stereo. Go.